How's it going, everyone? Session here. Welcome back to the Futures Rewritten Theoretical Ultimate presentation. Today, we are going to be covering the mechanical aspects of the Ultimate in mind, and as we have already previously discussed Phase 1, which the link for that will be below, as well as the storytelling, also linked below, we will cover what will be Phase 2 now of the mechanics in particular for the Futures Rewritten Ultimate. And I do want to just reiterate that this is just a fun presentation. This is absolutely not a raid guide whatsoever. So I would say please refrain from using this as like a reference point to actually progress the fight. There are much more useful references in terms of being able to actually understand mechanically how the fight works. What we're covering today is the current version of the mechanics as they are showcased within the Futures Rewritten Ultimate, and then the changes in remake versions of abilities that I would incorporate to actually add difficulty, but also bring a lot of more lore implication for the fight in mind. And so with that being said, we have the theory mechanics for Shiva, aka the Usurper of Frost. Now, in this case scenario, when the boss does appear, she has her quote, and then we'll prepare the quad slap tank buster. The tank buster is fine in terms of how it works mechanically. The only small tweak I would change, though, is that whenever you deal with the attack hit from the buster, you also deal with a physical vulnerability up debuff that you would need to either Asuna cleanse off so that the hit doesn't hurt as much. And this also would apply to the auto. Normally it would require a tank swap, but every single tank usually just invulns this tank buster, so it becomes like a little bit irrelevant. The only thing I would have changed is that whichever tank has the vulnerability up would need to either have it be cleansed, or they would have needed to have the other tank take the autos from that point forward, because you can currently just take an auto and then use like a short cooldown and it does no damage. So it kind of renders the idea of the physical vuln up being like a little bit useless. So not the biggest fan of that, so I would have incorporated that to be the case scenario. Otherwise though, Diamond Dust is actually like a phenomenal mechanic. I wouldn't change anything about it. I like the idea that the mirror will appear and then Shiva in ice and light form kind of do their thing, and then the explosion happens, right? Then light Shiva will either cast Reap or Cleave, and then you have to either go out or in, deal with the baits, swap as necessary, drop the puddles, deal with the formation of the thing, and have the knockback. So honestly, Diamond Dust, excellent mechanic. I wouldn't change anything about it. Additionally, after the knockback occurs, we deal with Sinbound Holy, and it can retain the same function where it targets the healers in particular with 4 light puddles, and then you to pretty much space them out between each other so that you can have enough space to deal with the next mechanic of silence versus stillness. However, what I would incorporate is that the Shiva form that we saw disappear will either stay in light form or transform into ice form as normal. With this being the case scenario, the Shiva clone will stay in ice form if the boss stays in light form. And if the clone were to transform into ice, then the other clone will turn into light. This is to incorporate the idea that the platform will always be able to turn into ice so that it can be used for the sliding mechanism for the next follow-up attack. That way there's always a reason to slide instead of having to use like a sprint or anything like that. So next, after this, we'll have to deal with the ice variation, if you will. So the ice variation is the current version in the ultimate. So the boss will either say sink into silence or in stillness freeze. So silence meaning she'll cleave behind her and then forward. Stillness being she'll cleave forward, then behind her, right? That's kind of the normal version that we actually deal with. So you'll slide behind her either early or later in order to dodge both attacks as necessary and then prepare for the follow-up after that. However, if it stays in light form, the boss will use axe or scythe kick, and essentially the attack will still be resolved in the same concept whether she is in ice or light form. The only thing that really changes is your positioning and the timing, because that way you can kind of be prepared for, if it's axe kick, then you wait in the same way you do with silence, and then you go in when the first hit goes off, and then you can dodge it accordingly. So, and then of course if it was scythe kick, then you'll go under first and then run away, and then be able to dodge the attack as necessary, and it works in that function as well. Then the boss will teleport to the middle and appear in light form. And it's normally expected at this point that the boss will cast Hallowed Ray, which is like an 8-person tank buster or stack attack that usually is like easily dealable with like 7 people with some mitigation, not too big of a deal. However, that's the only thing that they use in the normal version. It's always like this Hallowed Ray stack marker. Now, in my version of the case scenario, the boss would use Hallowed Ray, or it can cast House of Light, which is an 8-directional cleave that targets each player and needs to be spread apart in clock spots in order to make sure that nobody gets hit with it twice. So this is one option. Or the boss can cast Banish 3, which will also have orbs above her head that indicate whether it's a spread, meaning that there's 4 orbs, so that's a spread variation. Or it can do 1 orb of Banish 3, which is pairs. Or the boss can cast Sidekick if she'll say Reaper Cleave in this case scenario. Although I wouldn't incorporate the Axe Kick, I think just the Sidekick is the one that we keep. And then the boss could also cast Holy, which is a mechanic that is not in the Ultimate version, but it was present in the Savage version. Holy is a proximity AoE attack that comes either from the boss in the center place where they are, and it'll be pretty much like a big away mechanic. So you want to be away from the boss to take as little damage as possible from the proximity AoE. Or the boss will do the 8 directional version where it'll actually have 8 proximity AoEs be on the outer side of the arena. So you have to go under the boss to get hit by 8 times. And that way you can reduce damage as well in that functional case scenario. Once this happens, this opportunity appears for us to use our burst damage and start using all of our strong attacks. And then the boss will start casting Mirror Mirror. Now, the normal version of Mirror Mirror incorporates the idea that the boss will appear on the arena at random locations, and the mirrors will also have the opportunity to showcase 2 mirrors. The positioning of those mirrors will have a delayed repeat of the mechanic that was just executed by the boss. So in this current example, if it's 2 red mirrors, the boss will use Scythe Kick. The blue mirror will repeat the Scythe Kick, and then you would have to bait the cones in a different format in order to not clip anybody. So the melee and the tanks would bait them away from the range players and the healers in order to not get them clipped, but the range players will also bait them away from the boss and the melee players so that they can avoid clipping those folks. And then you would rotate as necessary to the safe spot of the mirror and then adjust and make that switch as necessary. Now with this other variation, we have what would be called green mirrors. So the way how the green mirrors would work is, instead of having the boss be able to be baited away from the location, you would actually have to keep the boss in the middle in this kind of case scenario, which I'm going to quickly grab out of the positioning. So the boss would actually cast the Axe Kick here. And because she's casting Axe Kick, the blue mirror would repeat that exactly as so. The green mirrors can only go 1 to 2 spaces away from the blue mirror's location. So as you can see here, the mirror that is top left is only 1 space away from here, and then this other mirror is 2 spaces away with the cardinals in mind and intercardinals in mind from the blue mirror. So that way, there's always going to be like a lineup safe opportunity to actually create this AoE spot, if you will. And so this will also incorporate people to deal with a small AoE that appears on all of them. So you'll want to have like a spread, if you will. And once all of this goes off, it'll be just one large executed mechanic. And then you can be prepared for the next follow-up attack, which will be the differentiation of, normally it's a banish 3 of pairs or spreads, but in this case scenario, the boss will either cast the same thing she casted after the Sinbound Holy was completed, where it'll be a Hollowed Ray, a banish 3, spread or pairs, a Sidekick, a Holy that it's either away, meaning that it's in the center, or it's going to be 8 directional proximity, meaning you need to go under the center of the boss. Then we prepare ourselves for the legendary mechanic that we know, that is Light Rampant. Now, for this case scenario, we only have one version of Light Rampant that's executed, but I have created an entirely different one with the Savage one in mind while still making it much more difficult. I will say, fair warning, the Bond version is the standard one that we're aware of. The Burst version is my own created unique one. And so this might take a while to explain, so let's get started. So, Light Rampant Bond will tether all the players except for 2 to each other, and your objective, as you know, is to create a star shape and actually make the split as necessary. So again, this is the normal version that you can currently experience if you go into the Ultimate, where the top 2 players will make the swap. The players that are north and south, considering we have a 3-3 splits, will make the adjustments necessary to make sure that the lines are all stretched correctly and also every single tower is resolved. The 2 players that do not have a tether will go to the outer corners of the edge of the wall on the west and east side in order to bait their puddles. Then you would have everyone meet up together north and south and then make the split as necessary for the stack markers, and then you'll dodge accordingly so in order to avoid getting clipped, and then make sure you have 3 stacks, because then the tower has to be taken by 2 players, or any player, or 4 players that have 2 stack markers, sorry, and that way you can be prepared for the follow-up on that. Now, let me let me try and explain this as slowly and concisely as possible, because this mechanic, it is much more difficult than Light Rampant Bond, but it is also, I think once you kind of get the hang of it though, it might be closer to equal difficulty. But the explanation of it, since it is a newer, like, reconcepted mechanic, it's going to seem a lot more difficult. But I think that I've created it to be only slightly harder than what Light Rampant Bond would have been. So Light Rampant Burst will tether all players except for two, which is similar to what we've already experienced with Bond, with an orb that must shrink down before it explodes. So it's very similar to what we experienced in the Savage version, while you have an orb chase you around the entire time and pretty much no one can touch it, or else it'll chain react, explode, people will die, it's going to be horrendous, and we don't want that to happen. Now, the towers and the positioning and placement will be pretty much the exact same thing. However, the difference is that you need the orb to not pop while it's in the larger size. And over the course of time of the mechanic, the boss will kind of just not be there. And so it gives you plenty of time to make every necessary movement to make sure that you don't pop the orb too early. So, as you can see, similar situation. We have a 3-3 split. We have the supports at the top, DPS at the bottom. We have a support that is at the west side with the puddle baits, and the DPS on the east side with the puddle baits. And so you'll want to do that. However, the switch is that all the players must swap to the opposite tower from their initial location. So as you can see in this previous slide, the tanks are north and northeast, and the healer is northwest. And then you have the caster southwest, and then the DPS melees are south and southeast. And you'll see here, they do a complete run to the opposite side while still dodging their orbs. That's kind of the trickiest part about this, is to be able to actually run around positionally to make sure that you can actually sit in your tower. This will create enough distance so that the towers will be soaked by the players, and then it will be given the opportunity for the orbs to shrink down one size as the tower gets resolved. The players that have the puddle baits that are on the west and east side will still continue to bait the puddle as necessary, and the purple bait players, of course, cannot touch the orbs as they will chain explode, and so we're still going to get prepared for the mechanic of the placement of the orbs that appear. So what will happen here is they're all going to set up again as if they do with the stack markers, and then the players with the puddle baits will have to make a formation that lets them actually meet up with the players that all have the orbs, and you'll have the party be split north and south like you would with the stack markers, even though there isn't a line tether to kind of connect them all together. Then you dodge accordingly, so as we have already showcased at tier 2, with the only difference being the orbs slowly chasing after the players. And at this point in time as well is when the orb would shrink yet down another size. Then, since the north section has the initial pop on the intercardinals, they have the easier way of being able to dodge, as they can just keep on rotating clockwise and not actually having to deal with the return, if you will. But the south side has the curse pattern where they have to actually circle back around because they can't keep on moving clockwise, as it won't be enough time for them to avoid the attack. So they would have to actually dodge back under and still keep having the orbs chase them around. All the players in this hypothetical scenario want to be by the wall so that the orbs are not an obstacle if you don't have to go under the tower. So tethered players that have one light or non-tethered players that have two lights will go under the tower to resolve, because in the same format, you need to have 3 stacks by the time the boss casts the follow-up ability when they return. And the tower will go off before you have to pop the orb. So at this point in time, every single player should be able to be at the wall and have not a single orb be in any kind of obstacle form, so that you can actually pop the orb and then it'll shrink down one more time in terms of being able to be resolved. And then every player will resolve the mechanic as necessary and have their 3 stacks of light, and then the boss will return and be targetable yet again. So this is the exact same formation that we've dealt with Light Rampant, but there's just a different variation of it. How it's executed is a little bit more freeform, because you don't have to worry too much about other people in terms of their positioning. You can really only just focus on like yourself in terms of the mechanic, right? So it does allow you that opportunity to focus on what you have to do instead of having to be mindful of everyone's positioning. And of course, with 3 stacks being the final steps of the situation, mechanic is resolved. But then the boss will start casting. Normally, it's always House of Light during this, which is the clock spot cones that you have to all bait in their positions to not like overclip each other. But the boss will also cast Hallowed Ray, which, since everyone has the light attack, or light stack, if you will, they will still gain one more if they were to get hit by that attack, since they have that debuff. So it will still count. If in theory you avoid that attack, then you'll still explode because you need to have 4 when you get hit by the boss in particular. And the boss will also have a opportunity of spread or pairs. We've also kind of encountered that situation as well. And so you'll end up entering the intermission phase as a result of actually securing that position with everyone having the correct amount of stacks. So then, as a result, the boss will start preparing absolute 0, and then Reen will, by canonical functionality, interrupt the cast and create the intermission phase by using Ice Veil and then putting everyone to, into the temporary freeze moment, and then we enter the intermission phase. Now, intermission is relatively the same, but there is a little bit of a twist so that there is still a much more pivotal role to actually create the opportunity for the fragment of fate to appear. So I do want to explain it very carefully. So once everyone has defrosted and then all the crystals appear, they already in the normal version of the ultimate have 4 crystals of light appear on the cardinals on the outside towards the wall, and then you have 4 intercardinal dark crystals that are closer to the ice field that is keeping Shiva / Usurper of Frost held in place. The difference now, however, is that the crystals are all empty and they are not elementally imbued, and so they must be imbued by all of the players. And the way that this works is the AoEs that are baited or the cones that are baited, all the crystals will be what's necessary to transform them into the crystals of light and or darkness. The boss will target 4 of the farthest players with the bound of light. This will put like a tower mark, if you will, on top of the players of light, and they pretty much have to stand close or if not on the ice crystals in order to make sure that they can be channeled with the elements of of light. If they are hit with dark, then obviously it's going to become a whole chaotic mess, and we want to avoid that. So it still retains the same idea. Now, the closest players that are near the ice field will be targeted with the bound of darkness. This is what's necessary to transform them over the course of time into dark crystals. Now, the way how this works is the crystals of light will target players with AoEs, as they do already in the normal version, that cannot hit other dark crystals so that the elemental imbuement is not disrupted. Additionally, the more times that the crystal gets hit, the damage will increase that it can take so that it is easier to actually eliminate those crystals and not have it be an obstacle in the process of actually powering up Gaia. The crystals of darkness will target the closest players with the cones, but the difference is that they must hit the other crystals to the of darkness in order to actually power them up for Gaia to hammer and destroy the ice veil. So the cones cannot hit the crystals of light as well, so that they don't disrupt their elemental imbuement either. Because if there was a mixture, then it will cause the vulnerability down debuff, as we're already aware of, and then it's going to be impossible to destroy it, and then GG scenario. So realistically, what would happen is the more often times that the crystals of light players put the elemental imbuement of light on those crystals, then they pretty much get like a stacking increased vulnerability up, makes it easier to destroy them, and then they can actually focus on doing damage to the ice veil. It is also necessary to actually activate those crystals because it'll allow the middle to be targetable. The crystals of darkness players, however, would need to hit the other crystals, as you can see here by the formation, right? You have the healer hitting the cone to the west, although it's hilarious that it almost clips the the player on the west side, but not necessarily the crystal, which is a good thing. But the healer that is southeast is hitting the crystal that is southwest, right? Southwest hitting northwest, northwest hitting northeast, and you can create like a box pattern, if you will. This is how the crystals will actually be powered up. And as a result of this, it's going to be necessary to do this so that the crystals can be charged up, and then they will actually be fed into Gaia as a result. And that way you can actually deal with them accordingly. So Gaia would not be able to destroy the crystal herself unless all of the crystals of darkness were fully powered and the crystals of light were all destroyed. So in theoretical concept, it's the exact same mechanic, but just with like a little bit of a trickier puzzle, because in the current version of the ultimate, the dark cones are just baited into cardinal out and they're not hitting anything, so that way there isn't any reason to be worried about having them hit anything, right? They're just kind of there as like a placeholder mechanic to help them destroy the light crystals, while the players that actually have to target the light crystal AoEs can deal with the mechanic as well. So it kind of gives the dark crystal players a little bit of more work to do, but the concept is still the same. But it does open up more room for error, and I think that will also kind of keep the lore concept into place as well, because the objective is to actually power up Gaia by actually charging up the crystals ourselves versus just having them stay alive, right? And then, of course, as a result of this, she'll say that her power is surging, and then she will use the hammer smash and she'll shave Mitron, which will drop the fragment of fate as a result. If any point in time that the crystal is destroyed, kind of a similar situation that we have currently with the ultimate, if the crystals are not powered up of darkness, and then even though Gaia does the attack, they need to actually be fully charged up. If there is even one missing charge, then Gaia might damage the crystal, but it will not drop the fragment of fate. Or if any of the crystals that are destroyed that are imbued with darkness are missing, then it will still follow the same kind of rule. If you try and do like a swap thing where, the crystals of light are trying to be baited on the smaller ones of darkness or vice versa, it's just not really going to be possible, because the way how the baits work, right, again, is that the light crystals target the outside and the dark crystals target the inside. So you're also going to disrupt the elemental imbuement of charging up Gaia, because if she gets charged up with light, it's going to obviously disrupt the flow and allow her to do the hammer smash. So I think conceptually, this is a lot more like lore applicable while keeping the puzzle a little bit mysterious, right? Because you wouldn't have thought about the idea to actually hit the other crystals to charge them up versus just actually baiting them outside and not hitting anything. So I think this serves as a much better way to create the mechanic execution of Shiva as a whole while retaining like a very exceptional wall, knowing the ferocity that she had in the Savage version. Light Rampant at the time of its release in Eden 8 Refulgence, it was one of the hardest mechanics that they had to figure out how to execute, and with that execution in mind, I wanted it to retain that exact same fear, if you will, for players to actually go in and execute that mechanic. I think it was actually an incredible one to see people put into practice and actually learn how to master, and I think putting that actual conception into the ultimate would have also yielded the same kind of results. So that is the theory mechanics for Shiva. And of course, as you know, what happens is the veil gets broken, Fragment of Fate enters Shiva, and then we have the segue into the Oracle of Darkness phase, where Mitron in Shiva form will imbue her with darkness and then transform her into the Oracle of Darkness, which we will cover in the next video. So thank you for watching and tuning in, and I'm definitely excited to keep on telling you more about the theories and why we have for the mechanics, and hopefully you're looking forward to it as well. So thank you for watching again, and I'll see you next time.